Engage fluo injectors.
Engaging fluo injectors.
Fluo reactors at 80%, sir.
Fluo containment field is destabilizing.
Emergency fluo containment protocols now. All hands brace for impact.
Brace for impact in 3, 2, 1.
Holy shit, we're back with another episode of World 1-1 Podcast. Before we get into all the good meat and taters, quick tease for the third half of the show. LeGrew and I are talking about, have we been classifying the generations of gaming wrong all this time? And what maybe should we be doing that's better? So stick around for that. Awesome conversation. You may not even agree, but it'll get you fucking thinking, and that's always a good thing. If we got you thinking, we did our jobs right. As always, you can and should subscribe, share, like, 5-star, do the social things. We're just going to say do the social things so that I don't have to go through the spiel and throw up in my mouth a little bit, the same as I do every time I hear it anywhere else. I get it, but bleh. So just do the social things. Speaking of social things, hit the link in the show notes, jump into the Discord, come talk to us. We want to hear what you think about anything that we're talking about or anything else that's on your mind. Who knows? It might show up on an episode as a show topic because, you know, that's kind of how this goes. It's all just organic shit. I take conversations and things that I had, and this just ends up here as a show. So shout out to our awesome sponsor, Imaginary Authors, helping you up your scent game with fragrances for guys, gals, and non-binary pals. More about them just before the break. All the good stuff, all the fluff stuff out of the way.
Choose your fighter!
I am, as always, your host, Rob the Wall. Joining me this week is my compatriot, Wes Evans.
Recording straight from the bedroom.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's not that kind of recording either.
Can it be, though?
This is Only Pods. God, there's a new podcatcher platform name, if ever there was one. Call it Only Pods. I would probably use that if they had a decent interface, just on the name alone. It's got to be better than what YouTube Music is doing with the Google Podcast shutdown shit, but that's its own whole conversation, and we're not going there. So, let's jump straight to...
Oh my gosh!
Video games.
Wes, I know for sure one thing you've been playing. Is there anything else before we get to that? Because I know you and I have been playing the same stuff.
Depends on if you count making games in Godot still. I took a brief hiatus from that. I've just been super busy lately, so I've been having to relearn a couple things. Because, you know, when you're a beginner and you don't practice, you forget a lot of the basics that are really, really needed. I'm officially making a commitment, having at least one game make a public appearance or a public release. Not necessarily a commercial release. This could just be something that I put out on itch.io, but I'm trying to keep myself honest and try to keep myself learning. I'm making that commitment. One game I make will be released publicly.
Dude, I was just listening to some Mark Brown stuff earlier before we were recording while I was making lunch, and you know that was the whole thing. He's like, yeah, getting your shit up on Steam, while not as nearly convoluted as getting it onto a console, still has plenty of its own steps and hoops to fucking jump through.
Right. Like I said, this could just be a free release on itch.io. I don't know yet, but I'm making that commitment. I'm going to make a game that gets a public release.
There you go. So, what do you think? Is there a predicted timeline?
Not really. I've got an idea for one that I wouldn't have to worry too much about the art, which I think for me is going to be the longest part, because I come from a STEM background, so programming, I don't want to call it easy, because it's not like I see a problem and instantly know at the snap of my fingers, oh, this is the code I need to make it work with no bugs. But I have a background that involved programming, not computer science specifically, but I have done it before, so I think I can translate that decently into learning how to program in Godot. I just have to learn GD script or C sharp. So I think that part's easy. I've got an idea in my head that won't need a lot of, that won't be heavy art, and I think can still be made entertaining. So I think that's probably what the first solo project is going to be. Solo without tutorials.
Okay. I'm assuming you've watched Mark Brown's developing series.
Yes. He's Game Maker's Toolkit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen him. I'm not doing anything in Unity until they've completely removed the runtime fee. I refuse to use it. I would rather them just say flat 2.5% of revenue, period, end of story, even if theoretically speaking the runtime fee could be cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I don't want them to have that foot in the door of, yeah, we'll take a small charge per install. That's just such a bad idea. Such a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I know you know Game Maker's Toolkit. I just didn't know if you'd actually watched through his developing series on there.
I have, yes.
So, which for anybody out there, even if you're not in development, it's a really cool series to check out. As somebody that's not in development, I still appreciate it because there's a lot of really good takeaway in terms of learning how to learn. And that's its own essential skill that people should have.
And I would argue to anyone listening to this, obviously if you're listening to this, you like video games. But take one piece of art you like, whether that be sculpting, video games, TV, movies, music, etc., etc. Just learn a little bit about what it takes to make one of those. Even if you're not going to full on make this a hobby or go into it professionally, I feel like it makes you appreciate the art form just a little bit more when you see what it's like to be involved in making them. Even if it's literally just like a little ditty for music or a browser game for video games or something like that.
I feel like the trade-off, though, is when you do that, it's like learning how a magic trick works. Because once you know something, you can't unknow it.
Hot take. I like magic tricks more when I know how they're done because I view them as the skill of the magician, almost. There's a great video I recommend everyone watch. It's a Penn and Teller doing the cup and balls trick and explaining it as they do it, and they even do it with clear plastic cups, just so you can fully see the whole process. And even then, at some points, it's hard to follow because it's just that impressive how they managed to do it.
Let's see, and I think here is where it comes down to, is it something that you appreciate for the skill and the technicality of what goes into it, or is it, I want the wonder and the magic?
I guess maybe it depends on...
and that's the personal choice. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer here. It's just something to consider.
That's fair.
Because like I said, once you pull that trigger, you can't unfire that shot. You can't unlearn something.
Well, at the very least, I could still have the, I wonder how you do this in Unreal, because one of the games that, or one thing we're going to be talking about today is for sure going to have been made in Unreal. I think the second game that you've told me we're for sure going to be talking about later is also Unreal, but I could be wrong. I know, mild spoiler ahead for what one game Raul and I both been playing. It's Hellblade 2.
Oh yeah.
That was made in Unreal. And mild spoiler for a third half of is it going to be next week's third half?
Oh, it's a few weeks down the line.
I think Return to Grace was also made in Unreal.
Yeah. So that's that's an upcoming episode that you should, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that way when that episode comes out, you get a notification and it's dropped in your feed and you can enjoy it.
Point being, I can still at the very least claim I have that wonder of how does it work in this engine versus the engine I've been learning, because, not every game's made the same way.
Right. So, anyways, segue there. I know you've been playing it, and you and I both want to gush on it. We've both been playing Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. So let's dive in and let's cut this bad boy apart. You start, because I know you and I think are coming from very different perspectives here, because you and I were coming from really different perspectives, at least on some of the technical side of things before it released. And I'm guessing we probably have some further expansions of those thoughts now that it's out and we've had a single run through.
Right. So I gotta say, I want to point out this game is beautiful. All right.
Oh my God, it's so
They did
pretty.
a very good job with that. I don't know if this is more the fault of Ninja Theory or more the fault of Microsoft for overselling what the Series X was capable of, though, because on console, because I don't have a high-end PC, so I can't say what it's like with a 4090, but on
Right.
console it is locked at 30 frames per second. And I think it's worth pointing out that is only on console, because people with high-end PCs are reporting that they run the game at 60.
Mhm.
So it's not so much of a choice to say we want the game at 30 because that's the feel we're going for. The choice that they made was we're not including a performance mode because on console, because we say that the graphics are the important part here.
Mhm.
And so
I've got a couple thoughts, and one of them just popped into my head. As far as locking it on console, part of me wonders if it's because they are essentially having to design it for two similar but not the same consoles between Series S and Series X.
that could very well be part of the problem, because I
'Cause
know
if they were putting it on Series, then they have to design it to run competently at the lowest common denominator, which is going to be Series S.
That's actually a good point, because Microsoft had to make an exception for their policy on all features that are available on the Series X, minus graphical and frame rate stuff, like obvious technical stuff like that, must be available in some way, shape, or fashion on the Series S. They had to make an exception for that for Baldur's Gate 3, because the Series S was not powerful enough to have a split-screen co-op.
Right.
And Larian just could not find a way to make it work. So if Microsoft wanted Baldur's Gate 3 to be available for Xbox, they had to make that exception. And you know, Baldur's Gate 3 being probably the biggest game of last year, at least in terms of what I'm going to call the gamers feed. I don't know what, I think Hogwarts Legacy was the best selling, but you know, within
Best selling does not mean best.
Right. Doesn't mean best, but within, I hate to use the word real gamer. That is not out of me disrespecting more casual gamers. That is out of me not knowing a better phrase off the top of my head.
Well, your real simple example here is Wii Sports is one of the best selling games of all time. By all technicalities, it doesn't mean it's one of the best games of all time.
Right. But within the circles of people who regularly discuss video games, I would say that Baldur's Gate 3 was the biggest.
Within the zeitgeist, yeah.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. So they've done that before, so we know that the Series S has held some games back on Series X. And that would make a lot of sense on if the frame rate was stuck on Series X because of that.
But yeah, and for what it's worth, that thought just popped into my head as we were having this conversation too. So, you know, part of me wonders how some of our conversations over the last couple of weeks would have gone had that thought have been floated out there first instead of just now, but it is what it is, and we're here, so.
Yep. I also am going to make one criticism that feels weird, that we're saying, oh, the graphical fidelity is one of the best parts of the game, but then significant portions of the game, you can't really see more than 10 feet in front of you. And a lot of the parts, I think this is kind of why a lot of games that get lumped into the walking sim category are first person and not third person, because there are significant portions of the game where the most prevalent thing on the screen is Senua's back.
Yeah. Well, and the that carries over from the first game, which was a very intentional choice from the perspective of we are forcing you to deal with her lived experience of hearing the voices, of hearing the Furies, but also having to decide how reliable are they. Because when you have that real tight camera angle and that reduced visibility, you then have to lean on those voices for safety, for warning. And when they are not the most consistently reliable, it creates and causes doubt. So there's a real intentional choice there.
Right. As much as I'm going to complain about that, though, I would just want to say when the game is beautiful, damn, is it beautiful. Like the
but
first
it's always
time,
beautiful.
like the first time we saw, what was her name? Iltoiga, something like that. The first giant you see. I hope I'm not spoiling too much. I'm going to try to keep
All right, you know
everything.
what? At this point, I'm going to put it out there. We are going full spoilers here. Adam has authorized full spoilers. There's a terrible joke. But yeah, this is, and this isn't even the deep dive that we're hitting today, at least as we're recording. That'll be out in a couple of weeks. But this is just talking about the game, and I think to really competently talk about it, we have to kind of get into some spoiler territory.
That's kind of part of the problem with reviewing a story-heavy game, is that you can't, how well can you say the story is good without, or the story is bad? Story is good, by the way. Please play this game.
Yes.
No matter what criticism I make, I feel like if I had to give this game a one-sentence review, it is probably not the worst, but one of the worst games I recommend literally everyone play, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in my opinion, you're gonna gush about this. I'm not gonna say you're wrong for liking it, because I see the appeal. I do believe that this is a game you should form your own opinion on, because it feels weird describing it this way, but it's kind of like the Napoleon Dynamite of games. Not because it's funny, but because you have no idea if you like Napoleon Dynamite until you watch it. No one can have an easy time recommending it. When it was on Netflix, the algorithm could not figure out what likes and dislikes would mean you would like it or dislike it. It is just that kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. No,
and as someone who overall still enjoyed the game, it is, like I said, usually when I recommend everyone play a game, it is one that I have almost nothing but praise for. I still recommend everyone play it because its highs are damn high, and I think you need to see if that's enough for you. And if nothing else, experience what a game with a story this good, with sound design this good, and with graphics this good can offer you.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but it's not just that, at least for me, it's not just that the highs are that high. It's that the story they are telling and the message they are conveying and delivering is that important. And that's a big component for me here.
I would agree. And I think it's important that we play games that get you thinking, like this one did. If the final thought you have is, man, overall, I don't think I like this, even if that's your final thought, this game sticks with you past the credits.
Yeah. No, and I've told a few people already this week, I'm like, this is one that you just kind of have to sit with for a while. In terms of once the credits roll, it's thematically very, very different than the original. You know, the original being very much about facing down your own demons and your, grappling with your own mental health struggles, whereas this one is more about I've grappled with them, but the journey of healing after that is still just as challenging and as arduous as the initial facing down your demons. I was thinking about this yesterday, and one of my personal heroes has spoken kind of on this subject after a fashion. That's Justin Furstenfeld from Blue October, and I've heard him talk on the subject of writing music these days compared to before he got sober in the angry days. And he's said rather eloquently that it's easy to write when you're hurt, when you're angry, when you're raging against the world. That's easy. It's very one note, and it's not hard to do. Writing music when you're happy that reflects that is a much more difficult prospect, because it's very easy to fall into the trope of just being simple poppy cheese and losing the depth and the complexity and the meaning. So it's a much more delicate process that requires a lot more refined skill and thought. And that's kind of the difference here between Hellblade 1 and Hellblade 2. So, Hellblade 1 is very, both physically and mentally, high impact, versus Hellblade 2 is a lot more technical in its writing and storytelling, because it requires a finer hand to deliver that message without getting lost in tropes. So that's one of those things that really stood out to me, because Hellblade 2 did manage to do that, and that's an impressive feat in its own right. That accomplishment should be praised. So beyond that, though, like you said, I think it's gorgeous. Having played all the way through it, I could have given two shits about whether or not it was locked at 30 or 60 or whatever else, because for me it was locked. So I had a smooth experience no matter what. I didn't have jarring frame drops. And
I actually had a few of those. Like during the scene with the second giant, I can't remember what his name was, but the one that was the storm giant.
Yeah, the sea giant.
Where he's chasing you. That game, it didn't freeze like long, but like it would like stutter at certain points during that for me.
Were you playing on an X or an S? I'm just curious.
X-ray.
Okay. I was just curious. I am too, and I didn't have any of that in that scene at all. So.
And I don't know if this was a stylistic choice or not, but it at least looked like to me that the frame rate went down in combat anytime you used the mirror.
I think there may have just been some stylistic choices that conveyed that a little bit.
That, though, like I said, that I could kind of see being a choice. That felt like a little bit of a Spider-Verse low frame rate moment to me, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I totally get where you're coming from on that. So, but yeah, it's oh so good. And as anybody listening is going to find out in a couple of episodes when the deep dive that we're recording today releases, it's spurred some real meaningful thought that also connects back to Return to Grace, which, if you enjoyed the interview that we had with Creative Bite Studios a couple of weeks ago, there's some thoughts that started there, and I think the new Hellblade kind of helped finish that thought and coalesce it into a single idea that we're going to be getting into, and I'm really excited for. All right. Quick hiccup, quick pause. We're back. So, help me out here. I apologize. We paused for a few minutes. I was in the middle of a thought. Where were we?
Okay, let's see if I can remember. We were talking about you didn't care about frame rate, you didn't have dips. I had a dip during the fight against the second giant, and I pointed out that the mirror felt like the frame rate, that frame rate going down might have been a choice, but one
that's right. That's right. Okay, so yeah, like I said, the frame rate did not perturb me, and I didn't hit any dips in frame rate, at least nothing that I fucking noticed. But that said, my overall takeaway was this was absolutely magnificent. I was thoroughly on board for it, and I know that there have been a lot of reviews with a lot of gripes in terms of saying this game was trash, this game was a monumental letdown compared to the first, and so on and so forth. And some of that is what you and I are heading towards for today's deep dive recording. But either way, it should very much still be played. Just don't go into it expecting the same type of brute force impact that the first one had. This is not that. And that change in tone very much reflects Senua being in a very different place in her life now. And I think it was the right decision here.
I've got one more thing. I want to gush about this for 1 second because it's something that a lot of people haven't been complimenting, and I just want to say it. The combat is probably the easiest combat I have ever felt that still felt intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag here, and this is where some of the criticisms online have come from in terms of reviews, is that in terms of what it demands of the player is far less than the first one, but in terms of the feel, the overall feel and the takeaway, when you combine the player's reduced level of interactivity in the combat mixed with the more high impact visceral visuals happening on screen, I think balances it out.
So I think so.
That's where I landed on it.
Yeah, because everything I've heard about the combat was, oh, the combat is simple, therefore it's bad, blah, blah, blah. And, I will agree, the combat is simple. But I still found myself liking every single fight just because you could tell how desperate Senua was in that. She's not a powerhouse. And I think that it kind of shows it really, really well. This is one of the times I found a game mixing difficulty with the art style made it even better. Because since you said we're going full spoilers, the final boss, when you go against, I can't remember his name, but it's Thord's guard, whatever that dude, the dad, the Goaty, that's his name. When you go against him, Gobi?
I think so, yeah.
When you go against him, at first the fight is hard by this game's standards. It's not Dark Souls. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you hardest boss fight ever in the first half, right? But when you say his name and you have power over him, he becomes a pathetic old man who you steamroll.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I just got better at him, but it really did. It felt like they made it significantly easier. At least to me.
Right.
And I think that was done on purpose because you have power over him now.
Right. Well, not only that, but where I ran into some issues with the Gobi fight at the end is that it's looking essentially for a series of quick time events without giving you any prompts, and so you've got to figure them out and then memorize the sequence.
I think
and that part tripped me up a little bit. and I may not even be describing or explaining it well, which kind of irritates me because I'm usually pretty decent at that, if I'm being honest. And that's not even trying to toot my own horn. It's just a thing that is. But yeah.
So I don't know if I just got very, very lucky with what I was doing, but I didn't notice it feeling like quick time events any more so than dodge at the right moment, parry at the right moment, more so than any other fights. It just felt like it was stricter timing than a lot of the fights before it had.
Well, the parry stuff all had tighter timing demands than the original did.
Yes,
that was already a piece. And I will say it took me a little bit longer to get the rhythm of the parry timing here with that tighter window, but it did come to me. Part of what I'm wondering too is if there wasn't a thematic choice in simplifying the combat here, from the fact that everything that Senua is fighting in the first game is essentially all in her head. Versus here, at least the majority, probably I would roughly estimate at least 3/4, if not higher than that, of the combat in Hellblade 2 isn't Senua fighting the demons that are in her head, but real physical people.
Right, because I know there were the slavers in the first act. There was the Draugr throughout the game.
Yep.
Let's see, maybe arguably the dead people underground. I don't know if they were Draugr too. I don't think they were, though.
I believe they're called the Hidden Folk.
I thought the Hidden Folk were the ones that were helping her. Where they, like, it was a challenge put on by them, but they weren't the ones directly attacking her. And the same way that, like, in gladiatorial combat, the guy who raises the doors isn't actually fighting. Does that make sense?
Kinda. But I'm basing this off of too, because I had the subtitles on, and it specifies when it's the Hidden Folk speaking.
Right. And so I didn't think the ones who were actually attacking her, like those monsters, I didn't think they were the Hidden Folk. Because I thought we didn't actually see them, unless you count those little outlines.
Right. And like I said, I never thought it was the Hidden Folk that were attacking her, but they did live down there.
Right. I question if they were real.
I'm wondering too, and here's spoiler territory again. I'm wondering if there isn't going to be more clarity on that in replaying it with the additional narrators.
Right.
Because, once you finish it, you get the option to play through it with a second narrator called The Others that'll give you different parts of the different viewpoints in terms of the narration of the story in the game. And so it's not just another voice actor reading the same script. It's a whole other character as the narrator, which means you're getting a different perspective. And if you can find all 18 of the lore stones, then it opens up a third narrator as well. Which, holy shit, the lore stones were ridiculously well hidden this time. First run through, I only found 3. And I only found 1 of the illusion walls.
I want to say I found 5 or 6 on my playthrough. Yeah. I didn't count, but I know I found more than 3. Not significantly more than 3, but because there are like 18, 20? 18? Yeah. So, wow.
Now,
I know
it looks like, though, you don't have to find them all in a single run.
Right. So that's good.
Second run, I will probably go through it with a guide just to make sure I'm getting all the lore stones and the illusion walls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you find any of the illusion walls?
I did not. I don't think I did.
Were you aware of them?
I don't think so. What is the illusion wall? I think that kind of answers that question.
Okay, so they are hidden around, but there are sections of wall or rock face, things like that vaguely look like they have a face or are a face, if you focus on them, that little section of wall will disappear, and there's a little hidden thing behind those sections of wall.
I got through one, but I don't think it's what you were talking about, because one of the lore stones was behind it. It was during the mission where you're trying to figure out the sea giant's name. There was a wall I made disappear by focusing on one of the water drops that had a lore stone behind it, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, I'll send you a link and show you just one. That way I don't spoil anything else. That way you have an idea of what you're looking for on your subsequent runs. But yeah, that's the whole thing was so good though. And days after the fact, I'm still just kind of processing what I experienced. So let's do you have any final thoughts to toss on here? Because we're gonna get a little longer on games of the week than we normally do.
Yeah. I'm just gonna throw in, I forgot how much I disliked the perspective puzzles from the first one, but I'm glad that there are fewer of them in this game.
Yeah, that's definitely very cut back. And the ones that are here feel like they are better marked.
Yes, because they are all except I think all of them. The thing you need to find is either bright red or bright yellow. So if you find, and you can also see like the markings in the air well before you get to the area. So even if you don't know where in that area it is, you can say, okay, I gotta get up this rock to get in the right area, and then from there I can start looking more intently.
Right. Well, the first one did that too, where it had the floating symbols.
I must have forgotten that. I didn't have time to replay the first one. I knew the floating symbols were there, but I could be remembering wrong, but I thought you only saw them once you were in the area already. I could very well be misremembering that, though, because it's been a while since I played, and I haven't had time to replay it.
They're proximity-based in both the first and the second.
Okay.
So they function the same. I do think the proximity in Saga is more generous than the first one. But,
that might be what...
I think, honestly, that made it a little more difficult for me, too. Because in the first one, I knew once I saw the floating symbols, I was really fucking close. This one, it felt like the proximity for those floating symbols was much wider, which made it harder to figure out where the exact right spot was.
And one last minor complaint that I fully recognize could just be me being dumb. Sometimes it felt like it wasn't obvious which items you could interact with and which ones you couldn't. Because there was a little fence that was 1 or 2 feet high where I was like, oh, Senua's got legs, she can get over that. But no, right. That was nope, you can't get over here. There was a wall that had the classic white paint to indicate, oh, you can interact with this. And then I couldn't climb up it. But in order to solve one of those perspective puzzles, but in order to solve one of those perspective puzzles, I had to open a door that wasn't marked. And so I just thought that was another quote-unquote wall that you couldn't get past, that they just put a door there to look pretty.
I take it you're talking about in the village there?
Yes.
Once you got Thorgestur with you?
Yeah. Yeah, the one where after you tied him up?
Right. I don't know. It may be a me thing and not a you thing, but I didn't have that issue. And I might be the oddball here that just assumed push the doors.
Yeah, but I don't want to criticize too hard on something that I fully recognize might just be me being dumb. But I feel like it's worth pointing that out. I've heard the same thing
from a few other people already, though. So it's not just you. So I think it might be more, it's just me in that I just assumed poke at the doors. So, but let's wrap this, and that way we can get to the break. But before we do, quick word about our awesome sponsor, Imaginary Authors, helping you up your scent game with fragrances for guys, gals, and non-binary pals, including their newest offering, The Language of Glaciers. Absolutely phenomenal. My sample came in the mail about a week ago, and it's the consensus verdict here is excellent. It's clean, it's light, I can't even call it bright. It's not bright, it's not floral, but it's like minty clean almost. It's like cold virgin snowfall clean smell, and I don't even know how to explain it better than that, because they even put, when they list the notes of fragrances in this particular one, virgin snowfall is listed, and I don't know how to describe it other than it is absolutely fucking correct. But it's a great the language of glaciers.
That's a real fitting fragrance for when we're talking about a game set in Iceland.
Oh yeah. So cannot recommend enough. Go check that out. Go grab yourself a sample of the Language of Glaciers, along with some of their other excellent stuff, including The City on Fire, Memoirs of a Trespasser, Bull's Blood, and more. Don't forget, not just fragrances, not just colognes and perfumes, perfumed oils, candles, bar soaps, all of it. Great stuff. Link in the show notes down below. Use the link. Helps us, helps them, helps you. Everybody wins. Go get yourself some smell good stuff. Turn some heads, drop some panties, do whatever you do. All right. Here's the part, the all-important part that comes right before the third half of the show. It is the break. And we're back with the third half of the show. This week we're taking a dive down the warp pipe.
Oh, wow. Love these pipes.
And we are asking the question, have gamers been trying to classify gaming generations all wrong all along? And joining me is my home slice, Josh the LeGroux.
Yo.
So let's dive in here, because you and I touched on this maybe about a month ago now, I think.
Yeah, we did. We talked about it a little bit.
It's been a hot minute.
It has.
But to preface this, the thought occurred to me at work one day. There's a terrible inconsistency when we're talking about like gaming in console generations.
Right.
And one person's talking about 7th gen when another says 3rd gen, but they're talking about the same fucking thing.
I mean, do people really do that? Like, do you sit down with people you say and say, I'm talking about 3rd gen? Or do you just say, I'm talking about, Super Nintendo or GameCube or whatever? Like, that's what I do.
It's come up quite a bit, especially when I was working at the game shop way back when.
So I can understand that. Like, among other people that play games, we might actually talk like that amongst ourselves. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Do. And that's the thing, though, is that we're talking about the same thing a lot of times, but everybody's got a different fucking numbering system for it to track these gens. Here's the thing, is that I'm honestly starting to think that trying to track gaming generationally by consoles is an outdated modus operandi.
Sure.
Because
Nintendo to thank for that, by the way.
Yeah. Because a lot of these don't sync up. They don't line up all nice and neat and tidy.
I agree. They don't, actually.
And that's only gotten even more messy with the iterative consoles that are coming out now. But
you mean iterative, like the PS4 Pro?
Yeah.
Now the rumor that the PS5 is having a Pro version and all that.
All that shit.
Okay. Does this have to do with backward compatibility at all?
No.
No. Just okay.
Nope. But it occurs to me, I think we would be better served when we're talking gaming generations if we start marking those eras by the trends that dominated in those time periods.
And I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked you when we were talking about this. Could you explain that a little bit? Because I think people are so in tune to this generation of hardware that you're talking about software.
I am.
So, so let's kind of break that down a little bit so we can kind of step people along.
Let's take it back to the 80s. We had platformers and the most trad RPGs, the arcade generation.
Yeah.
God, you could totally just benchmark an entire section, the arcade generation.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
And you say the arcade generation, and there is a specific time period that everybody automatically links to in their head.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us that were alive for the arcade generation.
Correct.
You know,
you're talking about the games now. So like Arkanoid, Space Invaders, those games.
You betcha.
Yep. Galaga.
The arcade generation is one. The 3D generation would be a little further down the line. That's when we started seeing, the wave and the trend of games moving into 3D spaces and not just 2D games.
Right.
That generation starts with stuff from at least the hardware side. You're talking, that's like the Dreamcast era, the PS1, the 64, but it's not strictly necessarily those consoles only. But that's really kind of the start of your 3D era. That's where that trend picked up and boomed.
Right. Okay.
You kind of keep plucking along and you get into the MMO era, because let's face it, there was a period of time, and World of Warcraft really kicked that off. There were MMOs before, and there were plenty after, but WoW was what really kind of kicked off the MMO area, because that was the big one that boomed, and then we saw all of them coming out of the woodwork trying to get in on that. And there was a point in time where just about it seemed like every other game that was coming out or getting announced was another fucking MMO.
Yeah, for sure.
Present day, I would say we are in the probably the beginning of the back half, hopefully, of the live service era.
I mean, we are. I hope, unless it finds a renaissance, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to find a renaissance. I think that
the games that are gaming, like Fortnite, Destiny, all those games are just going to continue.
Yeah, they're going to continue, and then there's going to be a bunch of other publishers and studios churning out their live service game, hoping to get in on a slice of that pie, and find out that market's already been cornered. Move on, you dumb idiots.
I mean, Sony recently with Helldivers 2 has kind of saw this, where all of a sudden they tried rolling out, you have to sign into PSN to play Helldivers 2 even on PC. Yeah. And more than 50% of the copies of the game sold on PC, by the way.
Yeah.
And they got huge pushback, and they're like, oh, no, we don't have to do that.
Well, the stupid thing is that Sony and Helldivers cranked out a rare exception where they did put out a live service game that everybody liked and jumped on board with.
Yeah, and then they started
they're one of the few that managed to squeeze in when normally this kind of thing doesn't fly.
Right. So I think we can use that as a cautionary tale, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
For that. Like, okay, this
the
is a very
MMO
fragile
era should have been the first cautionary tale, but
yeah.
Clearly they didn't fucking learn their lesson.
No,
and if that's not the epitome of those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've also
Exactly.
got, I would say, right around the Xbox, the original Xbox, and
RPGs.
PlayStation 2, you would probably start to see the beginnings of the online era.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
You know, especially with Xbox Live coming out of the gate strong.
And shooters.
Yep.
That's where it really took off. Like, yeah, there was your RPGs, and there was like Phantasy Star Online for Dreamcast.
God, I played so much PSO on my GameCube.
I know. Well, I played on my Dreamcast. I did not play it on GameCube, believe it or not. I have
loved
it.
playing it on GameCube.
I got it. I have it now, but I did not play it on there. I played it on my Dreamcast because I had Dreamcast Online, which we could play on, and dialing up on 56K modem, all that stuff.
The GameCube version was great because it had episode 1 and episode 2.
Right, I know, and that's why I got it like after the fact now.
Shout out! I don't know if it's still running. It might be. At some point I will care enough to check. But long after Sega shut down their PSO servers for the GameCube, that's when PSO Online actually got great.
Right.
Because there was a unofficial service that you could get into for free, no less, of people that cared enough about the game to keep it going and do it better than what Sega was doing. So like all the holiday events and the drop rate adjustments for those events and everything that Sega never did when you were paying them for it, these guys actually did.
Right. And that's the whole thing. Like even now with Phantasy Star Online 2, it's still really going strong on online forums.
Yeah, there's a huge community out there. I actually knew I had a friend ages ago that actually learned to speak or at least to read kanji, just so that they could play Phantasy Star Online on the Japanese servers where it was more lively and more active, like taught themselves.
Right.
So there's dedication in that community. But yeah, I mean, like I said, there's the online era in there. If we move up to the next step from the online era, I think is the emergence of the indie era, because that's when indie games now had a avenue to start becoming more readily accessible for most gamers by way of Xbox Live Arcade, the Wii Shop channel, things like that.
Right.
That's the indie era right there, or at least the first indie era, I think. But yeah, no, I think this is a more useful way to mark generational gaming than by console generation, because a lot of these trends and that follow these generational markers aren't specifically locked to a singular console generation either, and combined with the fact that those console generations don't neatly line up with each other.
Correct.
It just makes trying to use console generations to mark periods in gaming just feels antiquated and inefficient, at least to me. And I could be in the minority here. This could just be me talking out of my ass, but I think it's a way more useful way to do it for my money.
No, I agree, and I think it might take some time to kind of think about it. Just because of that. Because now we're starting to approach even where like phones can play games. So why would we, there's going to be 3 generations of phones in the time one console generation happens. Why would we totally, think about like, oh, it's only when this hardware comes out.
Right.
And you're getting diminishing returns on hardware as well. So like now with like the PS5 Pro supposedly going to do 60 FPS at 4K or whatever. And everyone was saying, well, didn't we promise that with the PS5? So really what it boils down to is these diminishing returns. And so where do people want to be? Do you really want to be here? And if you do, like, where is that, right? And so I think the relying on the software part of it might actually be a smarter move. I just don't know where those lines would come.
Right. And I think like anything in terms of when we're talking generations, especially with as much as we talk about the generations of people, those lines are fuzzy.
Oh, for sure.
And so I don't see an issue with those lines being kind of fuzzy and having a little bit of overlap here and there.
I don't see that at all.
It feels at least far more useful, if not more accurate. Not to mention when you're marking gaming generations by hardware iterations, you leave out and you completely discount the PC side of things.
Right. Yeah. Because in PC world, we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, does your PC run?
You upgrade your shit here and there until eventually you just can't anymore, and then you start from scratch. And
then are you playing a 25-year-old game? Yes, I'm playing a 25-year-old game with 120 frames per second now instead of 30 frames.
Uh-huh. But those gaming trends do cross between console and PC.
They do. And PC has always been I would say the redhead stepchild kind of, because the way it's looked at is like, oh, you got a lot of money, you can upgrade your PC. But when I was a kid, I had a PC just because my dad had one for work.
Right.
So I would totally just use it until it didn't run games anymore. And then I went back to my consoles. And I mean, I totally remember monochrome monitor, King's Quest 4, trying to figure out how shit worked. And getting it to work. And then, when my dad got a new PC, the first game I played, King's Quest 4 again, because now he had a color monitor.
Right.
And so that's the thing I think we need to think about more is like, you're playing your games better, but all games should just run. Right? Yeah. And we are actually coming to that kind of ubiquitous nature, especially with cross-platform gaming, and the money that's being left on the table, I think, is really pushing the corporations to do it.
Mm-hmm. I also think too, presently we see ourselves in the emergence of the hybrid remote play generation.
Right.
And that's not even a software, thing, but it's definitely the trend that's happening in the gaming industry right now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
We saw the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw the beginnings of this concept with the Wii U, and then we saw it much more fully realized and fleshed out with the Switch. And boy howdy, were some of the big giants real anxious to jump on that, because there was a clear want for that. There was clear success. Steam, Valve coming out of the gate second with the Steam Deck, and now there's a whole handful of handheld gaming PCs.
And I mean, I was very skeptical about a Steam Deck until a friend of mine got one. And I went over to his house, and I was playing Borderlands 2 on it. I just tried it. I said, can I just try it? And he showed it to me, and I'm like, wow. This is awesome. I thought the Switch was good. This is hands down better. And I'm just like, I get it now. I totally get it. If you haven't played that, you owe it to yourself to actually find someone that has a Steam Deck and just play a game on it. First of all, the screen is fan-fucking-tastic. And I have bad eyesight, and I'm looking at this, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And so I totally get it. I think that's the thing. You almost have to try it. It's like VR. You have to try it to love it. And I think once you love it, I think you're in.
No, absolutely. Like, honestly, when I saw the Steam Deck roll out, my heart got happy, my wallet cried, and I just got a little sad because it's not in the budget, but I at least saw it as an opportunity at some point where, because I'm just not big on PC gaming. It's not my bag.
Right.
I much rather be sprawled out on the couch or laying in bed playing a game than at my desk hunched over a keyboard, even with a controller up nose to my monitor. And Steam Deck and the like gives me an option for playing, honestly, a bunch of the indie stuff that isn't on console.
Switch.
That's
On
PC
Switch.
only.
Yeah.
Well, not even just that, but there's a bunch of them that are just PC only.
Yeah.
Because the barrier to entry for publishing those is much lower.
Right.
Don't
totally
get me wrong. The whole Steam will publish anything is a fucking problem, but it's not without its silver lining, and this is that silver lining.
Right. Totally get that.
So, and it's great for people too that want to be able to play PC games without having to spend $1,500, $2,000 on a rig to play it. To be able to just pick it up and see the Steam Deck compatibility thing and know that their shit's just going to work.
That's the whole thing. Yep.
You're bringing console convenience and portability and handheld convenience to PC gaming.
And I think that's where we're at, really. So we're at where PC gaming is not the niche thing anymore. It's not the thing where, like, oh, only the nerds do that.
It's getting less and less financially gate-kept as well.
Right, because PCs are cheap. And we also have, you can have the high-end PC, spend thousands and thousands of dollars, but I'm going to be honest with you, like, you don't have to. Spend $500 to $1,000, and you can have a pretty good PC that will play pretty much anything.
Yeah. At least currently, for a few years.
yeah, and it's not, I'm not saying it's playing at ultra settings, but how many people have a monitor, first of all, that can display, 4K, 120 frames per second? Not many people.
Right.
Are you going to spend, $2,000 on that monitor? Are you just going to spend, like me, I have 1440p, 120, up to 120 hertz monitor, and it's more than enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, my monitor setup is not all that grand either. I've got a 32-inch curved monitor on my left, cornered, and the only reason I even have that is just because it kind of happened to fall into my lap by weird circumstances.
Right.
And then on that, sitting next to it, is a 32-inch TV.
Yeah. That's what I'm at. I mean, I have a 37-inch ultra wide, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I deal with. I have a 49-inch monitor. I do use sometimes for editing and stuff like that, but I don't need it.
Right. But yeah, I think it's time that we rethink and start retooling the way that we look at marking the generations in gaming.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation that we had, for sure. And we started it, but I think maybe down the line we rope in some other people and talk about it again.
Mm-hmm. I think this is one of those things where
it's like continually revisiting. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's one of those things that, kind of evolves, and you can't really market until you're at least in the middle of that generation, because at that
For sure.
point it takes that long to see what's becoming the emergent, if not dominant, trend in the space.
Totally agree.
You know, if you had told me when the Switch came out that 5-7 years later we were going to be in the hybrid,
9 years later.
yeah, some shit like that.
It's like 9
You know, that
years
we were-
ago, dude.
Yeah. No, it's
It's
7.
8. It's 8.
Is it 8 now?
2017. We're coming up on 8. We're past 7.
Well, next year will be 10. Or no. Next year will be 8.
Yeah.
Out of my mind. So yeah, it's 7 years since the Switch dropped. But then, you know, it took 5 years after that for Steam to start, you know, rolling out the Steam Decks.
Right. Right.
And it was real quick after that you started seeing the others popping up.
Correct.
So, and that's one of those things where trying to mark generations by hardware doesn't work, but the hardware is dictating a dominant trend that you can mark generationally.
Sure.
So, you know, we see that in music even. You know, you can talk about the 70s, but you also talk about the disco era.
Right. And music is a little different where the hardware stopped,
Yeah.
you know. And
But-
I think we're getting there with games. It's going to be very minimal, where we're just going to be like, oh, this is the, you know, games that were like prettier and then prettier. You know, I mean, they're all good looking now. I mean, everything's good. It's just, what does it play like? And like I think you hit it on the head when you said, oh, is that a indie game or is that a game I can play, right? I think that is a good idea. Like, talk about gaming that way.
Yeah. It makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
But that might just be the little touch-atism speaking.
I get it.
But that said, I mean, if I can explain it in a way where somebody looks and goes, no, he's out of line, but he's right,
Yeah.
I can live with that.
I totally get that.
So
It's a good thing to revisit.
time to rethink our generational markers in gaming.
For sure.
But let's wrap this bad boy up. Want to say thank you to my home slice, LeGroux, for coming and hanging out with me this week. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. Thank you to our awesome sponsor, Imaginary Authors, helping you up your scent game with fragrances for guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Link to their stuff down below in the show notes. Also, in the show notes is a link to our Discord. Jump in and let us know what you think. Are we completely talking out of our asses, or does this actually make a little bit of fucking sense to you? And if it does, what do you think some of those defining generations and generational markers should be? Other than that, all that's left to say is subscribe, share, so that you get our awesome show in your feed every week, and tell the other gamers about it so that they can be better informed gamers. And I'm going to leave it with, say goodnight, everybody.
Yo, good night.
You've been tuned to the World 1-1 Podcast, powered by the World 1-1 Podcast Network. Press start to engage your mind. Peace!